Maya stepped out of her rental car and looked up at the towering glass building in front of her. The Pinnacle Aviation logo gleamed in the morning sun, a symbol of power and success in the aerospace world. She smoothed down her blazer and checked her watch. 10 minutes early, just the way she liked it. The security guard at the front desk barely looked up as she signed in. "You're here to see Mr. Blackstone?" he asked, his tone suggesting he'd seen plenty of consultants come and go. "That's right," Maya replied with a confident smile. She'd worked hard to get this meeting. Pinnacle Aviation was struggling with some serious engineering problems, and she knew she could help them find solutions. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than usual. Maya had been in the consulting business for 3 years now, but meetings with CEOs still made her heart beat a little faster. She'd learned to expect skepticism, especially from older executives who seemed surprised when she walked into the room. Richard Blackstone's office was everything she expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive artwork, and a desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. The man himself was equally impressive in an intimidating way. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that came from decades of telling people what to do. "Ms. Johnson?" he said, standing up from his desk but not moving to shake her hand. "I have to admit, when I heard about your consulting firm, I was curious. Young company, ambitious claims. Tell me, what makes you think you can solve problems that my team of experienced engineers cannot?" Maya had prepared for this question. She'd researched Blackstone thoroughly and knew about his reputation for being difficult. "Mr. Blackstone, sometimes fresh eyes can see solutions that others miss. I've worked on similar challenges before, and I believe I can bring value to your team." Blackstone walked around his desk, studying her with the intensity of someone evaluating a business deal. "Similar challenges, you say? Tell me about your background. Where did you get your training?" "I studied aerospace engineering at MIT, Maya began, but Blackstone cut her off with a wave of his hand. "MIT, impressive. Lots of smart people come out of MIT. But school is one thing, and real-world experience is another. Have you ever worked on anything truly challenging? Something that would test your abilities beyond what you learned in textbooks?" Maya felt a familiar tension building in her chest. She could tell him about her previous work, about the years she spent on classified projects that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in aerospace engineering, but that part of her life was behind her now, locked away under security clearances and non-disclosure agreements. "I believe my track record speaks for itself," she said carefully. "I've successfully completed every project I've undertaken in the private sector." Blackstone laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "The private sector, small companies with small problems. Ms. Johnson, we're not talking about fixing a broken radio here. We're dealing with cutting-edge technology that represents millions of dollars in investment." He walked toward the window and gestured for her to follow. From his office, they could see the company's main facility sprawling across several acres. Hangars, testing facilities, and office buildings stretched out like a small city dedicated to the science of flight. "You see all of this?" Blackstone said. "This company has been in business for 40 years. We've built engines for commercial airlines, military contractors, and space agencies. Our engineers have decades of experience, advanced degrees from the best schools, and access to resources that most consulting firms can only dream about." Maya nodded, waiting to see where this was heading. "And yet," Blackstone continued, "we have a problem that has stumped everyone. A puzzle that has cost us months of work and millions of dollars. My board of directors is breathing down my neck, and our investors are starting to ask uncomfortable questions." He turned to face her, directly. "So here's what I propose. Instead of sitting in this office talking about credentials and experience, why don't we take a walk? I want to show you something." They left the executive floor and took a different elevator down to the ground level. Blackstone led her through a series of corridors lined with awards, photographs, and technical diagrams. Engineers and technicians nodded respectfully as they passed, clearly recognizing their CEO. The hangar doors were massive, designed to accommodate aircraft during assembly and testing. As they opened, Maya felt the familiar thrill that came from being around serious machinery. The space was enormous, filled with partially assembled engines, testing equipment, and workstations where teams of engineers bent over computers and technical drawings. But it was the centerpiece of the hangar that caught her attention. Sitting on a specially designed platform, surrounded by diagnostic equipment and looking like the remnant of some industrial disaster, was what had once been a state-of-the-art jet engine. "Meet our problem child," Blackstone said with bitter pride. "A Rolls-Royce Trent 1000, worth about $30 million when it was functional. Now it's the most expensive paperweight in the aerospace industry." Maya walked closer to the damaged engine, her trained eye automatically cataloging the visible problems. The turbine blades were twisted and broken, some missing entirely. The outer casing showed stress fractures that spoke of forces far beyond normal operating parameters, but it was the damage to the combustion chamber that really caught her attention. The metal showed patterns of heat distortion that didn't match any failure mode she'd seen in textbooks. "What happened to it?" she asked, pulling out her phone, "to take some photos." "That's the million-dollar question," Blackstone replied. "It was being tested in our new simulation facility when something went catastrophically wrong. The engine basically tore itself apart in a matter of seconds. Our safety systems prevented anyone from getting hurt, but the engine was completely destroyed." A group of engineers was working nearby, and Maya could see them glancing in her direction. One of them, a man with graying hair and oil-stained coveralls, approached them. "Mr. Blackstone," he said, nodding respectfully. "Is there anything you need?" "Tom, meet Ms. Johnson. She's a consulting engineer who thinks she might be able to help us with our situation here." Tom looked at Maya with unconcealed skepticism. "Really? Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we've had some of the best minds in the industry look at this thing. 3 different consulting firms, 2 university research teams, and even some folks from the manufacturer. Everyone comes to the same conclusion." "Which is?" Maya asked. "It's impossible to repair. The damage is too extensive, and the failure modes are unlike anything we've seen before. Most experts think we should scrap it and start over with a completely new design." Maya nodded thoughtfully, continuing to study the engine. She could feel Blackstone watching her, waiting to see how she would react to this information. "You know," Tom continued, "with respect to your experience, this isn't the kind of problem that gets solved by someone fresh out of school. This engine incorporates some of the most advanced materials and manufacturing techniques in the world. Understanding how it failed requires years of specialized knowledge." There was something in his tone that Maya didn't like. It was the same dismissive attitude she'd encountered before, the assumption that she couldn't possibly understand the complexity of what she was looking at. "I appreciate your perspective," she said politely, "but I'd like to examine it more closely before I form any conclusions." Blackstone stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, Ms. Johnson, I have a better idea. You came here claiming that you can solve problems that others cannot. Here's your chance to prove it." Maya felt the attention of everyone in the hangar focusing on their conversation. Engineers stopped their work to listen, and she could sense the weight of their expectations. "I'm listening," she said. "Fix this engine." Blackstone said simply, "My team says it's impossible, but you seem confident in your abilities. If you can repair this engine and get it running again, I'll not only hire your consulting firm, but I'll give you the largest contract we've ever awarded to an outside company." The challenge hung in the air like a physical presence. Maya could feel the skepticism radiating from the assembled engineers, the doubt in their expressions as they waited for her response. "And if I can't," she asked, "then you leave here empty-handed and we never speak again. But more importantly, word gets around in this industry. People talk and they remember when someone makes promises they can't keep." Maya looked again at the destroyed engine, her mind already working through the technical challenges it represented. This wasn't just about fixing a machine. It was about proving herself in an industry that had already decided she didn't belong. "How long do I have?" she asked. 72 hours, Blackstone replied. "That should be more than enough time to determine whether this is actually possible, or just another consulting firm overselling their capabilities." The hangar fell silent except for the distant hum of machinery. Maya could feel dozens of eyes, watching her, waiting to see if she would back down from what seemed like an impossible challenge. She looked at the engine one more time, noting details that others had missed, seeing patterns in the damage that told a story more complex than simple mechanical failure. The next morning, Maya arrived at Pinnacle Aviation before sunrise. The security guard looked surprised to see anyone so early, but he'd been told to expect her. She'd spent the previous evening at her hotel, making lists and thinking through her approach. Now it was time to get to work. The hangar felt different in the early morning light, quieter, more focused. The damaged engine sat exactly where she'd left it, looking no less intimidating in the pale fluorescent glow. Maya set down her toolkit and walked around the engine slowly, studying it from every angle. She pulled out a small notebook and began sketching the damage patterns. Years of experience had taught her that understanding how something broke was often the key to figuring out how to fix it. The twisted metal told a story, and she was determined to read every chapter. By 8 o'clock, other engineers began filtering into the hangar. Maya could feel their eyes on her as they started their own work, but she tried to ignore the attention. She had a job to do, and only 72 hours to do it. Tom, the lead engineer she'd met the day before, approached her workstation around mid-morning. He was carrying a cup of coffee and wore the expression of someone who'd seen this movie before. "How's it going?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Still getting started," Maya replied without looking up from her measurements. Tom chuckled. "You know, I've been working on engines like this for 20 years. Started right out of college, worked my way up through every department in this company. I've seen failures you wouldn't believe, solved problems that had other engineers pulling their hair out." Maya continued her work, but she could hear the lecture coming. "The thing is," Tom continued, "this isn't like the engines you might have worked on before. This is cutting-edge technology. The materials alone represent years of research and development. The manufacturing tolerances are measured in thousandths of an inch. One small mistake and the whole thing becomes a very expensive piece of scrap metal." Finally, Maya looked up at him. "I appreciate the background information. It's always helpful to understand the complexity of what I'm working with." "I'm not trying to discourage you," Tom said, though his smile suggested otherwise. "I'm just being realistic. We've had teams from MIT and Stanford look at this engine, people with doctorate degrees and decades of experience. They all came to the same conclusion. Which is, some things can't be fixed. Sometimes you have to accept that and move on." Maya nodded politely and returned to her work. She could hear Tom walking away, probably to share his wisdom with the other engineers. Within an hour, she noticed that people were finding excuses to walk past her workstation. Some pretended to be looking for tools, others claimed to be checking on nearby equipment. All of them were really there to watch her work and wait for her to give up. The morning passed slowly. Maya took precise measurements of every damaged component, photographed the failure patterns from dozens of angles, and began creating a detailed map of exactly what had gone wrong. It was painstaking work, but she'd learned long ago that rushing through the analysis phase usually led to mistakes later. Around lunchtime, she made her first significant discovery. Hidden beneath layers of twisted metal and heat damage, she found something that didn't belong. It was subtle, almost invisible, unless you knew exactly what to look for. But once she saw it, everything else began to make sense. The damage pattern wasn't random. It was too precise, too focused on specific components that would cause the exact type of catastrophic failure they'd experienced. Maya felt her pulse quicken as she realized what she was looking at. This wasn't an accident. She spent the next 2 hours carefully documenting her findings, taking photographs and measurements that would hold up under scrutiny. But she kept her discovery to herself. If she was right about what had happened here, she needed to be very careful about who she shared that information with. By late afternoon, word had spread throughout the facility that the consulting engineer was still working on the impossible engine. Maya could feel the skepticism growing, stronger as the hours passed. Engineers would pause their conversations when she walked by, then resumed talking in hushed tones once she was out of earshot. Dr. Peterson, the head of the engineering department, stopped by her workstation around 4 o'clock. He was older than Tom, with the kind of academic bearing that came from years of teaching and research. "Ms. Johnson," he said formally, "I hope you don't mind if I observe your work for a few minutes. I'm curious about your approach to this problem." Maya looked up from her calculations. "Of course, though I should mention that I'm still in the analysis phase. I haven't started any actual repair work yet." Dr. Peterson examined her notes and photographs with interest. "Very thorough documentation," he admitted, "but I notice you're spending a lot of time on areas that we've already determined are beyond repair. The combustion chamber, for instance. The heat damage there is so extensive that replacement would be the only viable option." "You may be right," Maya said carefully, "but I like to verify everything myself before I make any assumptions." "Assumptions," Dr. Peterson repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose assumptions can be dangerous in this line of work. Tell me, what's your theory about what caused this failure?" Maya had been expecting this question all day. She glanced around, the hangar noting who was within earshot, then chose her words carefully. "I'm still gathering data," she said, "but the failure patterns are quite interesting. More complex than they initially appeared." Dr. Peterson nodded slowly. "Complex, yes. That's why we've concluded that repair isn't feasible. The interaction between multiple failure modes creates a cascade effect that compromises the entire structure." "That's certainly one interpretation," Maya agreed. As the day wore on, Maya found herself working under increasing scrutiny. Every few minutes, someone would find a reason to check on her progress. The questions were always polite, but she could sense the underlying skepticism. "Any breakthroughs yet?" Tom asked during one of his frequent visits. "Still working through the analysis," Maya replied. "You know, there's no shame in admitting when something is beyond repair," he continued. "Sometimes the most professional thing to do is recognize the limitations of a situation." Maya looked at him directly. "I appreciate the advice, but I prefer to finish my work before drawing conclusions." Tom shrugged. "Your call. Just remember you've got less than 48 hours left." As evening approached, the hangar began to empty out. The day shift engineers packed up their tools and headed home, leaving Maya alone with the damaged engine and her growing certainty that nothing about this situation was what it appeared to be. She worked late into the night, using the quiet hours, to conduct tests that she couldn't perform during the busy daytime. The results confirmed her suspicions. This engine hadn't failed due to design flaws or manufacturing defects. Someone had deliberately caused this damage, using techniques that required intimate knowledge of both the engine's design and advanced material science. But who would do such a thing? And more importantly, why? Maya stood back from the engine and looked around the empty hangar. Tomorrow would bring another day of skeptical observers and subtle challenges to her competence. Tom and his colleagues were clearly expecting her to fail, and some of them seemed almost eager to watch it happen. She thought about Blackstone's challenge and the way he'd smiled when she accepted it. Had he known this was impossible? Or was there something else going on here? Something that went beyond a simple test of her engineering skills? Maya gathered her tools and prepared to leave for the night. She had less than 2 days to not only repair an engine that everyone believed was beyond saving, but also to figure out who had sabotaged it in the first place. The technical challenge was daunting enough, but the human element was proving to be even more complicated. As she walked toward the exit, Maya made a mental note to be more careful about who she trusted. If someone had gone to the trouble of sabotaging a $30 million engine, they probably wouldn't hesitate to interfere with her attempts to repair it. The security guard looked up as she signed out. "Working late," he observed. "Big project," Maya replied. "Well, good luck with it. From what I hear, you're going to need it." Maya smiled and headed to her car, already planning the next day's work. She had a feeling that luck was going to be the least of what she needed to get through this challenge. But she also had something that her skeptics didn't know about: experience with problems that went far beyond simple engineering failures. Tomorrow, she would begin the real work. And hopefully, She would start getting some answers about who was behind this sabotage and what they hoped to accomplish by destroying Pinnacle Aviation's most important project. Maya arrived at the hangar earlier than usual on her second day. The security guard barely looked up as she badged in, already used to her early morning routine. She'd spent most of the previous night thinking about what she'd discovered, and now she needed to confirm her suspicions. The damaged engine looked different to her now. What had initially appeared to be random destruction now revealed itself as something far more sinister. She pulled out her tools and began examining the areas she'd identified the day before, documenting everything with the thoroughness of someone who knew this evidence might be crucial later. The first component she focused on was a turbine blade. That had seemed unremarkable among all the other damaged parts. But under closer inspection, she could see microscopic tool marks that shouldn't have been there. Someone had weakened this blade deliberately, creating a stress point that would fail under specific conditions. Maya photographed the evidence from multiple angles, then moved to the combustion chamber. Here, the sabotage was even more sophisticated. The heat damage that everyone assumed was from the engine failure was actually covering up something else entirely. Someone had used a cutting tool to create hairline fractures in critical areas, then disguised the damage to look like natural stress failures. As she worked, Maya's mind kept returning to similar cases she'd encountered in her previous career. During her time with classified government projects, she'd investigated industrial sabotage before. The techniques used here were advanced, requiring both specialized knowledge and access to precision tools. This wasn't the work of a disgruntled employee or a random act of vandalism. By 9 o'clock, other engineers began arriving for their shifts. Maya noticed Tom watching her from across the hangar, and she made a mental note to be extra careful about what she revealed. If someone inside Pinnacle was responsible for the sabotage, she couldn't afford to tip them off before she had solid proof. Dr. Peterson approached her workstation around 10:30, carrying his usual clipboard and wearing his professional smile. "Good morning, Ms. Johnson. How did the rest of yesterday go? Make any progress?" "Some," Maya replied carefully. "I'm still working through the analysis phase, but I'm starting to see some interesting patterns." "Patterns?" Dr. Peterson's interest seemed genuine. "What kind of patterns?" Maya gestured toward the engine without being too specific. "The damage distribution is more complex than it first appeared. There are some failure modes that don't quite match what I'd expect from a standard engine malfunction." Dr. Peterson nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, we noticed some unusual aspects as well. That's part of what makes this case so challenging. The failure mechanisms seem to have interacted in ways that our computer models didn't predict." "Have you considered the possibility that this wasn't a standard failure?" Maya asked, watching his reaction carefully. "What do you mean?" "Well, sometimes when failure patterns don't match known failure modes, it's because something external influenced the process." Dr. Peterson's expression didn't change, but Maya caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise? Concern? It was gone too quickly to be sure. "External influences," he repeated slowly. "That's an interesting theory. What kind of external factors are you thinking about?" "I'm still investigating," Maya said, "but I want to be thorough before I draw any conclusions." The conversation was interrupted by Tom, who had been hovering nearby and finally decided to join them. "Dr. Peterson," he said, nodding respectfully. "How's our consultant doing? Still convinced she can work miracles?" There was something in Tom's tone that Maya didn't like. Yesterday, his skepticism had seemed professional, even if it was condescending. Today there was an edge to it that felt almost hostile. "Ms. Johnson is being very thorough in her analysis," Dr. Peterson replied diplomatically. "Thorough is good," Tom agreed. "But at some point, you have to accept reality. This engine is destroyed. No amount of analysis is going to change that." "Fact." Maya looked at him directly. "You seem very certain about that." 20 years of experience," Tom replied. "After a while, you develop an instinct for these things. You can tell when something is worth saving and when it's just wishful thinking." "Instinct is valuable," Maya agreed. "But sometimes the evidence tells a different story than our initial impressions." Tom's jaw tightened slightly. "Evidence? What evidence? All I see is a lot of measuring and note-taking, but no actual progress toward fixing anything." The tension in the air was becoming noticeable. Other engineers had started glancing in their direction, sensing that something more than professional disagreement was happening. "Tom," Dr. Peterson said quietly, "perhaps we should let Ms. Johnson continue her work without distraction." "Of course," Tom replied, but he didn't move away immediately. Instead, he looked at Maya's workstation, studying her notes and photographs with obvious interest. "Interesting approach," he said finally. "Very detailed documentation. Almost like you're building a case for something." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. Tom's comment was too close to the truth for comfort. She was building a case, but not the kind that anyone expected. "I believe in being thorough," she said simply. Tom smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, make sure all that thoroughness doesn't distract you from the actual goal. You've got less than 24 hours left, and Mr. Blackstone isn't known for his patience with consultants who overpromise and underdeliver." After Tom and Dr. Peterson left, Maya continued her investigation with renewed urgency. She'd confirmed that the sabotage was sophisticated and deliberate, but she still needed to figure out who was responsible and why they'd targeted this particular engine. She began researching the engine's history, looking for clues about who had access to it during manufacturing and testing. The trail led her through shipping records, quality control reports, and maintenance logs. Most of the information was routine, but one detail caught her attention. 3 weeks before the engine failure, there had been an unscheduled maintenance session. According to the records, Tom had requested access to the engine for what he described as a routine inspection. The work had been done during an evening shift when fewer people were around, and it had taken longer than originally planned. Maya felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Tom had the knowledge, the access, and the opportunity to sabotage the engine, but she still needed to understand his motive. She spent her lunch break making discreet inquiries about Tom's background and recent behavior. What she learned was disturbing. According to several engineers, Tom had been increasingly bitter about the company's direction and his own career prospects. He'd been passed over for promotion twice in the past year, despite his seniority and experience. More troubling were rumors about Tom's financial situation. He'd been dealing with expensive medical bills for a family member, and there were whispers that he'd been looking for ways to supplement his income. Maya realized she was looking at a classic case of industrial espionage. Tom had sabotaged the engine, probably at the request of a competitor willing to pay for inside information about Pinnacle's technology. The failure would not only cost Pinnacle millions of dollars, but also damage their reputation and potentially cause them to lose future contracts. But proving her theory would require more than circumstantial evidence. She needed to find concrete proof of Tom's involvement, and she needed to do it without alerting him to her suspicions. As the afternoon wore on, Maya began implementing a careful plan. She continued her public analysis of the engine damage, but she also started gathering evidence of the sabotage in a way that would hold up under legal scrutiny. She photographed the tool marks, documented the deliberate weakening of components, and created a timeline that linked the damage to Tom's unscheduled maintenance session. The work was delicate and dangerous. If Tom realized what she was doing, he might try to interfere with her investigation, or even attempt to sabotage her repair efforts. Maya found herself looking over her shoulder frequently, aware that she was potentially working in the same space as someone who had already committed one serious crime. By evening, she had assembled a compelling case for sabotage. The evidence was clear and well documented, but she still faced a dilemma. Should she reveal her findings to Blackstone immediately, or should she wait until she'd completed the engine repair? Maya decided to take a middle path. She would continue working on the repair while quietly gathering additional evidence about Tom's involvement. If she could fix the engine and expose the sabotage simultaneously, it would be a complete vindication of her abilities and a major victory for Pinnacle Aviation. But as she prepared to leave the hangar that evening, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Tom had made several unnecessary trips past her workstation during the day, and his questions about her progress had become increasingly specific. She gathered her tools carefully, making sure not to leave anything behind that might reveal the true direction of her investigation. Tomorrow would be her final day, and she would need every hour to complete both the repair and her evidence gathering. As she walked toward the exit, Maya reflected on how much her understanding of the situation had changed since she'd first accepted Blackstone's challenge. Maya's phone alarm went off at 5 in the morning. Today was her final day, and she had less than 12 hours to complete what everyone believed was impossible. But as she got dressed and prepared for what would be the most important day of her career, she felt a strange sense of calm. She'd spent the night planning every detail of what was about to happen. The engine repair was actually finished. She'd worked until nearly midnight using techniques and knowledge that no one at Pinnacle could have imagined she possessed. The damaged components had been replaced or repaired using methods that went far beyond standard aerospace engineering. But Maya had decided not to reveal the completed repair immediately. Instead, she had something much more dramatic in mind. When she arrived at Pinnacle Aviation, the security guard seemed surprised to see her so early again. "Big day today," he said with a knowing smile. "Word around here is that this is your last chance to prove yourself." "Something like that," Maya replied, signing in with steady hands. The hangar was empty except for the overnight maintenance crew, who were just finishing their shift. Maya walked to her workstation and began setting up for what she knew would be the most important presentation of her career. By 8 o'clock, engineers began arriving for the day shift. Maya could feel the anticipation in the air. Everyone knew that her 72 hours were almost up, and they were curious to see how the impossible challenge would end. Tom was among the first to arrive, and Maya noticed that he seemed more nervous than usual. He kept glancing at her workstation and checking his watch as if he was waiting for something specific to happen. "Good morning," he said, approaching her with what appeared to be genuine concern. "How are you feeling? Ready for the big moment?" "As ready as I can be," Maya replied, watching his face carefully. "You know," Tom continued, "there's still time to gracefully bow out. No one would think less of you for admitting that this challenge was beyond what anyone could reasonably accomplish." Maya found his sudden concern interesting, especially considering how dismissive he'd been over the past 2 days. "I appreciate the advice," she said, "but I think I'll see this through to the end." Tom's smile faltered slightly. "Well, just remember that Mr. Blackstone doesn't like to be kept waiting. If you're going to admit defeat, it's better to do it sooner rather than later." As the morning progressed, more people began gathering in the hangar. Word had spread throughout the company that the consulting engineer's deadline was approaching, and employees from other departments found excuses to visit the main assembly floor. Dr. Peterson arrived around 9:30, followed shortly by several other senior engineers. Maya could see them forming small groups, speaking in hushed tones and occasionally glancing in her direction. At 10 o'clock sharp, Richard Blackstone entered the hangar with his usual commanding presence. He was dressed in an expensive suit and wore the confident expression of someone who expected to be proven right very soon. "Ms. Johnson," he said, approaching her workstation with several executives following behind him. "I trust you're ready to demonstrate the results of your 72 hours of work?" Maya looked around the hangar, noting that nearly 50 people had gathered to watch what was about to happen. Engineers, technicians, managers, and executives all stood in a loose circle around the damaged engine, waiting to see whether she had accomplished the impossible or failed spectacularly. "Actually, Mr. Blackstone," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly across the hangar, "before I demonstrate anything, I need to tell you something important about this engine." Blackstone's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh? And what would that be?" "This engine didn't fail because of a design flaw or a manufacturing defect," Maya announced, her words causing a ripple of surprised murmurs throughout the assembled crowd. "It was deliberately sabotaged." The hangar fell completely silent. Maya could see shock and disbelief on the faces around her, but she also noticed something else. Tom had gone very pale, and his hands were trembling slightly. "That's a serious accusation," Blackstone said slowly. "Do you have evidence to support this claim?" "I do," Maya replied, pulling out a tablet computer loaded with the photographs and analysis she'd compiled over the past 2 days. The damage patterns show clear evidence of deliberate weakening in specific components, tool marks that shouldn't be there, stress fractures that were created artificially, and a failure sequence that was engineered to cause maximum damage. She began displaying her evidence on a large monitor that had been set up for equipment diagnostics. The images showed microscopic details that revealed the true nature of what had happened to the engine. This type of sabotage requires intimate knowledge of engine design and access to precision tools, Maya continued. It also required someone who could work on the engine without arousing suspicion. Tom stepped forward from the crowd, his face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous," he said loudly. "You're making wild accusations because you can't admit that you failed. This is just a desperate attempt to distract from your inability to complete the repair." Maya looked at him calmly. "Actually, Tom, the repair is complete. The engine is fully functional and ready for testing. But before we demonstrate that, I think everyone should know how it was damaged in the first place." The crowd stirred with surprise at her announcement about the completed repair, but Maya continued her presentation without pause. 3 weeks ago, there was an unscheduled maintenance session on this engine, she said, displaying maintenance records on the monitor. The work was done during an evening shift by someone who had full access to the engine and the expertise to modify it without detection. Tom's face was now bright red. "You can't prove anything," he said, his voice rising. "These are just theories and speculation." "Actually," Maya replied, "I can prove quite a lot, including the fact that you've been selling proprietary designs to overseas competitors for the past 6 months. She displayed financial records that she'd obtained through her security clearance and government contacts. The documents showed a series of payments to accounts linked to Tom's family members, all corresponding to dates when sensitive information would have been accessible to him. "This is insane," Tom shouted, looking around the hangar desperately. "She's making all of this up. She's some kind of industrial spy herself trying to frame me for her own failures." But Maya wasn't finished. "Tom, you made one crucial mistake when you sabotaged this engine. You used techniques that were developed in classified military research programs. Techniques that only a handful of people in the world have access to." She paused, letting that information sink in before continuing. "I know about those techniques because I helped develop them. My name is Dr. Maya Johnson, and until 3 years ago I was the Director of Advanced Propulsion Research for the Department of Defense. I held security clearances that gave me access to the most sensitive aerospace technology in the country." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Blackstone stared at her in complete amazement, while other engineers began talking excitedly among themselves. "I left government work to start my own consulting firm," Maya continued. "But I maintained my security clearances and my contacts within the defense community. When I recognized the sabotage techniques used on this engine, I was able to trace them back to stolen military research that has been showing up on the black market." Tom tried to back toward the exit, but 2 security guards had appeared and were blocking his path. Maya's government contacts had been busy during the night, and federal agents were already on their way to the facility. "The repairs I made to this engine don't just restore it to original specifications," Maya said, turning back to address Blackstone and the crowd. "They actually improve its performance by 15%, using advanced materials and design modifications that I developed during my government research." She walked to a control panel and began the engine startup sequence. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the massive machine came to life, running smoothly and quietly despite having been completely destroyed just days before. "This engine now incorporates technology that's 5 years ahead of anything currently available in the commercial market," Maya announced over the sound of the running engine. "Technology that Pinnacle Aviation can license and use to revolutionize their entire product line." Blackstone stood speechless, watching the engine run with perfect efficiency. The sound was different from what they'd expected, smoother and more powerful than the original design. Tom made one last desperate attempt to escape, but the security guards were ready for him. As they restrained him, federal agents entered the hangar to take him into custody. "Dr. Johnson," Blackstone said finally, his voice filled with amazement and respect, "I owe you an apology. I thought I was giving you an impossible challenge, but instead, you've given us the solution to problems we didn't even know we had." The crowd burst into applause as the full implications of what had happened began to sink in. Maya had not only completed the impossible repair, but had also exposed a serious security breach and provided Pinnacle Aviation with access to revolutionary technology. As Tom was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Maya with a mixture of hatred and defeated resignation. 3 weeks after the dramatic revelation in the hangar, Maya sat in a conference room on the top floor of Pinnacle Aviation, looking out at the sprawling facility below. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of activity, and today's meeting would determine the future of both her consulting firm and Pinnacle Aviation itself. The repaired engine had exceeded every expectation during its extensive testing phase. Not only did it run flawlessly, but the improvements Maya had incorporated made it 15% more fuel efficient than the original design. The aviation industry was buzzing with excitement about the technological breakthrough, and Pinnacle's stock price had doubled in just 2 weeks. Richard Blackstone entered the conference room with a smile that was completely different from the skeptical expression he'd worn during their first meeting. Behind him walked several board members and executives, all eager to finalize the partnership agreement that would transform both companies. "Dr. Johnson," Blackstone said, extending his hand warmly, "I still can't quite believe everything that's happened. 3 weeks ago I thought I was giving an impossible challenge to a consultant who was probably in over her head. Today, I'm sitting down with one of the country's most accomplished aerospace engineers to discuss a partnership that could revolutionize our entire industry." Maya shook his hand with a confident smile. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Though I have to admit, even I didn't expect things to unfold quite the way they did." The board chairman, an elderly man named Mr. Rodriguez, leaned forward with obvious curiosity. "Dr. Johnson, I hope you don't mind me asking, but why didn't you reveal your background from the beginning? Surely your credentials would have opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed." Maya had been expecting this question. "There were several reasons," she said thoughtfully. "First, much of my previous work was classified, so I couldn't discuss the details even if I wanted to. But more importantly, I've learned that people sometimes make assumptions based on credentials rather than focusing on actual capabilities." She gestured toward the window where they could see engineers working in the facility below. "I wanted to prove myself based on results, not based on titles or past achievements. And frankly, I was curious to see how Pinnacle would treat someone they perceived as just another consultant." Blackstone had the grace to look embarrassed. "And we didn't exactly cover ourselves in glory on that front, did we?" "Actually," Maya replied diplomatically, "the experience taught me a lot about the challenges facing this industry. There are talented people everywhere, but sometimes they don't get the opportunities they deserve because of assumptions and biases." The conversation was interrupted by Maya's assistant, who brought in a stack of newspapers and industry publications. The headlines were impressive. "Revolutionary engine technology emerges from corporate sabotage case. Former Pentagon researcher saves aviation company, and Pinnacle Aviation stock soars on military technology breakthrough." "The media attention has been incredible," said Ms. Chen, Pinnacle's head of marketing. "We've received inquiries from airlines around the world, and our order backlog has tripled. But more importantly, the story has highlighted some serious issues about industrial espionage and corporate security." Maya nodded grimly. "Tom's case isn't isolated. The investigation has revealed a network of individuals selling sensitive technology to foreign competitors. The Department of Defense is taking this very seriously, and there will probably be more arrests in the coming months." Mr. Rodriguez shuffled through some legal documents. "Speaking of Tom, I understand he's agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence?" "That's correct," Maya confirmed. "His cooperation has already led to the recovery of several other stolen technologies and the identification of additional security breaches. It's a reminder that we need to be much more vigilant about protecting our intellectual property." Blackstone leaned back in his chair. "Which brings us to today's discussion. Dr. Johnson, we've prepared an offer that we hope will be attractive to both you and your consulting firm." He slid a folder across the table. Maya opened it and reviewed the terms, which were even more generous than she'd expected. Pinnacle was offering her a position as Chief Technology Officer, with significant equity in the company, plus funding for her own research division. "This is very generous," Maya said after reviewing the documents, "but I have some conditions of my own." "Name them," Blackstone replied immediately. Maya had spent considerable time thinking about this moment. "First, I want to maintain my consulting independence. I'll work closely with Pinnacle, but I also want to be able to take on projects with other companies, particularly smaller firms that might not otherwise have access to advanced technology." "Agreed," said Mr. Rodriguez without hesitation. "Second, I want Pinnacle to establish a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program, not just for hiring, but for advancement opportunities, project assignments, and leadership development." Ms. Chen smiled. "Actually, we've already started working on that. Your experience here highlighted some serious problems with how we evaluate and treat talented professionals." "And third," Maya continued, "I want to create a mentorship program that brings together experienced engineers with young professionals from underrepresented backgrounds. The aerospace industry has enormous potential, but we're not doing enough to develop all the talent that's available." Blackstone nodded enthusiastically. "Dr. Johnson, those aren't just conditions, they're improvements that will make our company stronger. I think we can work with all of them." The meeting continued for another 2 hours as they worked through the details of the partnership. Maya would lead Pinnacle's research and development division while maintaining her own consulting practice. She would also have a seat on the board of directors and significant input into the company's strategic direction. As the formal negotiations concluded, Maya found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. 3 weeks ago, she'd walked into this building as an unknown consultant facing an impossible challenge. Today, she was leaving as a partner in one of the aerospace industry's most promising companies. But the personal satisfaction went beyond professional success. The engine repair had proven that her decision to leave government work and start her own firm had been the right choice. She was now positioned to bridge the gap between military research and civilian applications, potentially accelerating innovation across the entire industry. 6 months later, Maya stood on a stage at the National Aerospace Engineering Conference, accepting the Industry Excellence Award. The auditorium was packed with hundreds of engineers, executives, and researchers from around the world. "When I started my consulting firm 3 years ago," she said to the audience, "I believed that the most advanced technology should benefit everyone, not just military applications. The partnership with Pinnacle Aviation has proven that this vision is not only possible but profitable." She gestured toward a large screen showing images of the improved engine design. "The technology that saved Pinnacle Aviation is now being licensed to manufacturers around the globe. Airlines are reporting significant fuel savings, which means lower costs for travelers and reduced environmental impact." The audience applauded, but Maya wasn't finished. "More importantly, this project has demonstrated the importance of recognizing talent wherever it exists. The aerospace industry has traditionally been dominated by a relatively narrow demographic, but our best innovations come from diverse teams with different perspectives and experiences." She paused to look around the auditorium, seeing faces that reflected the growing diversity of the engineering profession. Today, Pinnacle Aviation's mentorship program has placed over 200 young engineers in positions throughout the industry. These talented professionals are already contributing to breakthrough innovations that will shape the future of flight. After the ceremony, Maya was approached by a young woman who introduced herself as Jessica, a recent engineering graduate who had been placed through the mentorship program. "Dr. Johnson," Jessica said nervously, "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done. 2 years ago, I was ready to give up on aerospace engineering because I felt like I didn't fit in. Your program not only gave me the technical training I needed, but also the confidence to pursue my dreams." Maya smiled warmly. "That's exactly what we hope to accomplish. What are you working on now?" "I'm part of a team developing next-generation electric aircraft engines," Jessica replied proudly. "We're using some of the principles from your military research to create propulsion systems that could revolutionize short-distance air travel." As Maya listened to Jessica describe her work, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The impossible engine repair had been just the beginning. The real victory was in creating opportunities for the next generation of engineers to push the boundaries. of what was possible. Later that evening, Maya sat in her hotel room, looking through emails from colleagues around the world. Pinnacle Aviation had become a case study in how military technology could be successfully transferred to civilian applications. Universities were incorporating the story into their engineering curricula, and other companies were adopting similar mentorship